This podcast is recorded on the traditional lands of the Kulin Nation. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. We extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples listening today.
Hello and welcome to Give and Toke Cannabis Conversations, the show that aims to elevate the conversation about cannabis to a higher level. If you enjoyed today's show, please make sure you are following us on your favourite platform and help us out by leaving a 5-star review on Apple and Spotify. You can also stay in touch with us by following @GiveAndToke on Instagram. Today we welcome to the show Amanda Wright, manager of Pineapple Express Cannabis Store in Victoria in beautiful British Columbia, Canada. I'm your host Paul, and this is Give and Toke Cannabis Conversations. So you and I met a couple of years ago when I was living abroad in Canada, doing my thing, trying to explore this amazing, fresh new cannabis industry. I know it's not perfect. I know that Canada and BC in particular have a very rich history with BC bud. So what's your history in the industry itself?
All right. Well, I started in the industry a decade ago. In 2012, I became a bud tender at what was called a medical cannabis dispensary. I worked for them for 3 or 4 years, and then my husband started his own shop. So I went over to do bud tending for him, and this was still the gray market days or legacy days, people like to call it in Canada, where, it wasn't quite legal, but based on, some really important key players going through the courts and getting cannabis deemed and access to cannabis, medical cannabis deemed essential. There were all these kind of like loopholes that left room for people who, were maybe on the fringe, doing their best to be legal within this new framework. So I have been with Pineapple for 7 and a bit years. I'm also working for a boutique sales agency out of Toronto, doing their inside sales and stats for all across Canada, which is really interesting. So it gives me kind of a scope nationally instead of just provincially. So I'm a bud tender for a decade. I've been a sales rep for almost 2 years. I am a cannabis sommelier certified through the Trichome Institute, which is an American education system. So it's not fully towards Canada, but I learned a lot through that. Yeah, that's me.
That's quite a breadth of experience. And that's exactly why I have you on the show today, because what Canada did was so unique in 2018 to make cannabis federally legal, October 17, 2018. It's also my girlfriend's birthday, so it's an important date every single year. You've got this experience pre and post. I came to Canada post-legalization, and while I got to see the kind of tail end of the old dispensary era, it was a very significant change. And I think what people have seen in North American movies and what you still see in a lot of American states, that dispensary model, that very swiftly changed. So I'd love to talk about that for a moment, kind of what you saw in the early days, what that model looked like. If someone was to come into Pineapple Express pre-2018, what that looked like, and then what changed. So we'll cover that first. What did it look like pre-federal legalization?
So pre-federal legalization, it looked like, just honestly, it kind of looked the same if you were just looking visually. It was a place where people came to buy weed, and just inherently a place where people talked about everything they're going through, mental and physical. It was a really kind of like a landing space for all these people who felt like they existed on the fringe of society, because that's kind of what cannabis users were back then. You were using a substance that was illegal. And even though medically speaking, it was legal in Canada, there was only one way to get medical cannabis, and that was through the government. And it was inconsistent. It was horrible quality. Most of it was ground stems included. So you just got like a bag of shake
No
basically.
good.
And when you are using on a medicinal level, that's pretty much the worst thing that you could be given. So, because the government just hadn't figured it out, and these, I don't know if you know about Ted and Owen Smith. So, they are from Victoria. Ted owns one of the oldest running dispensaries, medical dispensaries in probably the world, but Canada for sure. And he's actually still operating outside the lines of legality. He's fighting really hard to keep his shop open. But basically, Owen Smith went to court and fought for reasonable access to cannabis and won. The court said, yes, everyone who needs medical cannabis should have easy, safe, reliable access to it. Unfortunately, the other half of that was the government wasn't providing that. So these shops started opening up mostly in Victoria and Vancouver. It's still pretty rare for the rest of Canada. Like in Alberta, there were no legacy shops. In Saskatchewan, there were no legacy shops. They started opening up and kind of running in this gray zone of saying, well, you said that we are supposed to have easy, reliable access, safe access, but you're not providing that with us. So there was kind of like this uprising of people being like, well, if we're supposed to have safe and reliable access to it, and we're not, we're going to fill that gap. So in the beginning, I am not a rule breaker. Let's just say that if a cop asks me to tell him the truth, he's getting the truth.
Yeah. I feel we're kindred spirits in that regard.
Yeah.
I'm such a square.
That's it. I really am. Like I'm like, even smoking weed, I was kind of like, oh, I really feel like an outsider and I shouldn't be doing this, but it really helped me. So it was a good friend of ours, and I had heard that there was someone selling weed storefront. And like up until then, you'd have to know somebody, or you like honestly would walk around the streets of downtown and kind of be like, does anyone have weed? Like there was a time where my boyfriend and I found a guy sitting outside 7-Eleven, and he just like literally reached into his pocket and handed us like a handful of crumbled weed. And I like gave him money because that was like the only way to get it. So when I heard this, a friend too, he was maybe an acquaintance, that he had a shop and he was selling weed. I was like, what the heck? Like, I need to go check this out. So we went there, and sure enough, you just walked in and it was nice. There was beautiful chairs and it was painted well. And you walked into a door and there was a man standing there, and he had all these different choices of like the most beautiful cannabis I've ever seen, and a variety. What are you talking about? Like names and all these different products. And I was like, whoa, this is incredible. Like, how are you doing this? And at the time, he told me that which was a lie, but he told me that he was running a pilot program for the government of Canada. And I'm a gullible person. And I was like, oh my God, that's incredible. Like, this is amazing. And he was like, well, why don't you guys?
I'm running a pilot program. The government just doesn't know it yet.
Exactly. And he probably to this day feels that that's the truth. So I thought that what I was doing was really helping the medical community and forwarding cannabis in our country, which in the end I was doing. It's just what I was doing it while breaking the rules a little bit, right? So I just started working there, and the risks of the cops knew we were there and kind of understood what we were doing, but raids were real. Like at any point you could be raided. And the longer I worked for this person, I realized, maybe he's not telling me.
I haven't seen any documentation about this pilot program.
Yeah, like, and I'm a smart girl. I was at university at the time, and I was like, starting to put some things together and realizing, okay, hold on, I might not be where I think I am. But by this time, I had already been selling cannabis for years to people who really needed it. And like, people going through cancer treatments, people going through depression, postpartum, people with chronic pain. And I saw them, when they couldn't afford to come in for a few days and then finally could come in. And then when they could come every day, like I saw a difference and I started really understanding the medical benefits, even for myself. Like I thought I was a recreational user, but as I started selling to hundreds of people, and I have a psych degree, and just naturally how I'm always kind of like collecting evidence and, sorting it and then, making new decisions. And so I just kept seeing all of this and I was like, well, I'm in it now. Like there's no way that I could not continue doing this. Because if you think, 2012, that's quite a few years prior to legalization, right?
Big time.
Yeah. So it was like I was in it, and the shop that I was working for was rated. I wasn't working that day, and neither was my partner, thank goodness. But I was like, okay, so I see the danger, but I also see how important this is. Like, this is really, really important that we keep doing this. Shortly after that, the city of Victoria and Vancouver, but I'll speak specifically to Victoria just because I know it better, they started seeing that legalization was going to happen. So they decided to get ahead of it. There was 33 shops running in Victoria at the time. So yeah, the city of Victoria basically was like, okay, well, we can't really enforce these shops because there are so many of them, and they could see that it was heading to legalization. So it's kind of a waste of resources. So what they decided to do was set up zoning. So if you were a gray market dispensary, you could apply to get zoned prior to legalization to sell cannabis storefront. And you pay a business license, and the cops know you're there and they know that you're working with the city. So that's once that came into play, that's when my boyfriend and his business partners decided, okay, we're going to do this. Like, let's, now that we know that we can actually function inside a set of rules, which is where we all enjoyed living, let's do this the right way. The person we were working for at the time had no interest in that. He was happy doing what he was doing. So we left, and I had a 1-year-old at the time. So I didn't want my name on anything. I didn't want, because it's still working in this gray zone. So I was like, let's do this, but I'm going to stay kind of on the outside and just work for you. So the city of Victoria allowed those 33 shops to apply for zoning. We had to go through city council, get approved. Anybody in the neighborhood could complain. And, it was like that anytime you open a new business or whatever. So once pineapple was zoned, a big sigh of relief came off, because now we could potentially still get in trouble, but not really, because the city has given us paperwork and said, we know you're functioning, you've paid your business license, you're paying your taxes, you're doing everything else. So we got to open up this shop, but it was still in the gray zone. So there's no government supplying the cannabis. There's no one telling us what we need to test for. There's no one telling us anything. We were running it. I'm grateful because, the people who own Pineapple are great people. So they, right from the jump, did things the right way. We were functioning as if we were a fully legal business, and our goal was to become fully legal. I think a lot of other shops in the neighborhood, it was not, or in the town, were not doing that. They were still just they were doing what they had to do to stay functioning. But I don't think a lot of people saw end goals. Like, I think a lot of people were like, what are the chances if this becomes legal that we'll get grandfathered in? Probably slim to none, because we're functioning outside the law technically. And a part of me felt that way too. I was like, maybe we won't get to be grandfathered in. Maybe they'll look at us and say, well, sorry, you ran an illegal dispensary for 7 years, so you don't get to play in the rules. I've always said since the beginning of the time, I'm doing this for the stories that I get to tell my grandkids, because I don't, like I said, I'm a rule follower. I don't have a lot, like I've never jumped out of an airplane. I've never done, any of these like wild things that I could tell my kids or my kids' kids. So I've always said I'm doing this for the stories I get to tell my grandkids. So let's just keep going. Let's do our best. So, yeah, it was really awesome. You could have any type of product. There was still a lot of medical communication going on the sales floor. It kind of felt, my mom was a hairdresser, and she always said, like being a hairdresser is like being a counselor. Being a bud tender is really like being a counselor, because these people are coming in, they're not heard from their doctors. Their doctors are telling them that cannabis is the root of their problem rather than the help that is. And honestly, I'm a medical user, and if I didn't have cannabis when I needed it, there are ramifications in my life that are negative, like I don't have patience. I am more depressed. I am all these things. So knowing that from inside of me, as well as witnessing it on the outside, I was like, okay, we're doing something amazing. These people are coming in, they're sharing their problems. I'm not a doctor, but I have a psych degree and I sell to thousands of people a week. So, taking all that and saying, okay, well, I had these customers that came in that said they were depressed and they tried this strain, and 4 out of 5 of them came back and said it didn't do anything good. Okay, maybe I'm not going to recommend that for the next person that comes in. I gave this to so and so expecting it to help their pain, but actually what they said is it knocked them flat on the couch and they slept for 12 hours straight. Okay, mental note, someone who can't sleep, I'm going to try and offer them this. And so I was just building this like internal database. And I think that's what made Pineapple, and still does make Pineapple, very unique. Everybody there is really cannabis passionate. We took we still do take the time with every single person. Unfortunately, now, if we talk about a difference about, legacy versus legal, we can't talk medical. When someone comes in and says, I'm having trouble sleeping, there's kind of like a rigmarole that we have to do,
You dance around. It's like, some people have found that this aids with sleep. This may ease your pain.
Yeah, I noticed when I was struggling,
Yeah.
and it's kind of unfortunate because it's put up this, I don't want to say like falseness to it, but it's just not as genuine as it used to be in legacy, where it was like you were really listening and you were really honest about wanting to help them. Whereas now it's like it could be an inspector, and I'm willing, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
tell you, X, Y, Z, and just hope you get it.
You painted a really great picture there of kind of what it was like beforehand. There was a bit of that Wild West element. There was that essential need to break the rules. And that's the thing. An industry like this is laid upon a bedrock of people that broke the rules, some of which have not been included in this modern market and what it looks like now. So, back in the day, people would come in, they'd smell those jars, there'd be weighed in front of them, there'd be that real experience. It's a little bit more homogenous now. So talk to me about what it then transitioned to and what that looks like today.
Well, one thing that really blew my mind and continues to blow my mind, and that I didn't anticipate, was brands. I just really never saw the industry going so brand focused and
Yeah.
everything being all about big brands and consumerism. And it's just it's like counter cannabis culture. You know what I
Yes.
mean? So
And let's be real. There's a bunch of douchebags that have come over from the kind of booze industry and have just translated their booze skills to cannabis, and it's a completely different clientele, completely different product, but it has just been looked at as another commodity to brand and sell.
yeah, which that really blew my mind. And I think you do, as a consumer, feel that on, and I think it's overwhelming because that's not how you pick weed. It's never been how you pick weed. And I think that um, it might be nice for the people that never consumed prior to legalization. That might be a nice atmosphere for someone to come in, and then you try a brand, and then you think in your head, okay, well, now I can trust everything from this brand because I liked this one thing. And how come, this weed didn't do what that weed did, but it's the same brand? And it's like we're missing all the education that comes
Yeah.
underneath. So that's one thing that's really, really different from now that it's legal is the brands and the brands pushing bud tenders to sell and brands trying to get all their SKUs into a store. It's just that's really different. And I think that was the most different thing for me, other than how, we get our weed now, which I guess we haven't touched on before. So prior to legalization, you built a community of growers that prove to you over time that they know what they're doing. It was really nice because you trusted people and you trusted their product, and they got to know your store and what works for your customers. And to post, it's like you said, we're not allowed educational samples. Even here's an interesting fact, even the people growing the weed can't legally try the weed before they sell the weed, which
blows my mind. We used
yeah,
to have growers come into our store and buy their own products because they hadn't had them yet.
like that to me, I'm just like, what? And I'd like to think, the legacy version of me would like to think that they try it. They got to try it. But
You
I,
hope they're breaking the rules there, actually, and not telling us yet.
but I really don't.
We're both rule followers. We hope they're breaking them.
Totally. Please tell me you're breaking the rules so that I know I'm getting something good. But even we're given just a range. So, like, if you're a purchaser at a legal cannabis store, you're looking at, okay, this could be 20 to 30%, they'll tell you. And it's like, how can you make a purchase on something with such a wide range of THC? It's not the most important thing in cannabis, but to a lot of consumers, that's the first thing they look at. And if you're trying to, be successful in your business, having that wide of a range is insane. Or, 20 to 30% is great, but sometimes you'll get like 11 to 19. Well,
Well, if
19%.
it were alcohol, if it was 4 to 6%, that's a huge difference, and that's a 2% change. So yeah, they're offering this product where, like you said, THC percentage isn't the most important thing, but Health Canada have created this monster where it's one of the only things on the container that's actually useful to the consumer. So it does become a deciding factor, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really has become, and that's something else. Like, we didn't have THC percent in Legacy. You looked at the flower because you could look at you touched it, you squeezed it, you tried it, and you said, okay, some people, everyone had different things, but this is, platinum, gold, silver, bronze. We're going to break it down like that. Bronze is probably something grown outside. It's not as, you can look at it and see it doesn't have as many crystals. It's kind of crunchier. Okay. And then platinum's that weed where you look at it and you're like, woohoo, I just won the lottery with this one, right? Like,
This is going to change my life. Yeah.
yeah, totally. So, yeah, that's another really big change. The consumer is so heavily focused on THC, and it's kind of everything so far in legal cannabis has set us back a little bit. That being said, I am so hopeful for the future, and I am very passionate about cannabis, and I do believe we're going to get back, just because the people who continue to be in this industry for the right reasons are going to stay here. Like, I'm not going anywhere. You know what I mean? Like, I know for sure I'm not going anywhere. I will be in this industry till the end. I'll be fighting for what I think is right into the end. I'll be taking all my anecdotal evidence to the end, and I'm going to keep hoping for the best. But yeah, it has, the legal system, how we get our weed, the brands, it's all just a little bit, what's the opposite of nuanced?
Generic.
Yeah, like it's really, really general. And that just tells me the people making the rules don't know what's going on, really.
This is a unique industry because I think there are so many other industries where your use of the product doesn't necessarily dictate how you would set guidelines and rules and understand it. I do think that someone can be a non-drinker and successfully sell alcohol. I think someone can never have a drop of coffee in their life and understand the story of how it was grown and what the taste is going to be and all the flavor profiles. Cannabis is so unique in the fact that effects vary so significantly, recreationally, medically, therapeutically, that I do believe, in my personal opinion, You have to be a cannabis user to effectively understand how it works and to sell it, to grow it, to have that kind of passion. And I think that's something that has been lost in legalization. I'm noticing it in the medical market here in Australia. I certainly noticed it in my 2 years in Canada. A lot of people that make decisions about cannabis have never, ever used it.
Yeah, we had a customer who comes to Pineapple, just casually told me one day that she was one of the people who helped make the decision of a 10 milligram limit for edibles. And I said, oh, that really intrigued me. And I was like, oh, okay, like what for you, what's a good dose for edible? And she goes, oh, I've never done an edible. And I was just like, huh.
That's not right.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
That you were one of the people at the table, because 10 milligrams, for some people, it's great. And I think that if the government was doing it as an ease in, like, okay, we're going to cap it at 10 and let everyone kind of experiment. And then we're going to, go to 25. And that would make sense to me. But, almost 4 years in, we're not seeing any movement on that number, even though the legacy market is thriving, especially in edibles. That's shocking to me, because one of the whole reasons weed became legal is, in my opinion, not because people thought that was the right decision. It was just like, well, let's at least make some money off of it. They're doing it anyways.
Absolutely. That's what I continue to advocate for here in Australia. I'm like, if the Conservatives can just see the tax dollars that are going to come, like that's good enough reason.
Yeah. And like, it's already everywhere, especially in BC anyways. So, they said one of the main goals in legalization was to get rid of the legacy market. They have not succeeded in the slightest. So that tells me your game plan didn't work. So when a game plan doesn't work, you got to go back to the table. You know what I mean? And refigure things out. And no one's doing that.
It also begs the question as to whether there is a true game plan.
Yeah.
It's whatever they planned hasn't worked. But then you start to go, have you guys thought beyond the election cycle? Have you thought beyond the decade, the next 20 years? Because this is, basically we're stuck in this prohibition weirdness from kind of 60, 70 years of misinformed policy, racism, things like that. So we know that significant mistakes have been made, but it is weird for them to for Canada to be the first country to do this and not really have an end goal. It's like, yep, we're making money. And I did see this week on LinkedIn that the most profitable cannabis businesses in Canada are owned by the government. So I'd like to talk about that a little bit more, because essentially you've gone from this beautiful, world famous BC bud, this kind of grassroots system of cannabis users and people trying to understand how to pair people with the right products that will help them, that will enhance their life. It's not just about getting stoned. It's not just about getting high. It's truly a therapeutic thing. Like, I love that even the word recreational is starting to be changed to adult use. People are talking about their personal therapeutic use. But the government has really stepped in and gone, we're controlling this. We're dictating what packages look like. We're dictating the misted fogged windows in storefronts. So God forbid a child sees a plain cannabis container from the street. Meanwhile, the liquor store down the road has beach balls and Muskoka chairs and towels and giveaways and things like that. It's a very kind of weird paradox, but you would wish that they were just going, oh yeah, this is how we're tiptoeing into it. But it doesn't seem to be that way. It's not like, oh, we've evaluated this, we're going to change this. The rules have stayed tight. Some have tightened, like the change in the droppers on oil, things like that it just don't make sense for the consumer. So 4 years in, you've got the government controlling distribution, you've got them controlling the licenses. It costs a lot of money to exist in cannabis. Recently, there was an issue where the government distributor, the BC Liquor Distribution Board, who are in charge of getting the cannabis from everyone and then shipping it to stores, they've screwed you guys over big time in the private store space. So let's talk about that a little bit. We've got the BC Liquor Distribution Board, who are in charge of distributing cannabis to stores across British Columbia, and their workers have gone on strike in the distribution centres. 4 years into an industry that you have had to work so hard to get everything done, what did this strike mean for you guys in private stores?
Yeah, it was really shocking, especially after being declared essential at the beginning of COVID. I think that was when they were talking about the strike happening, they gave us 72 hours notice. That 72 hours fell outside of our ordering window. So, even the stores that were or would have been able to place an extra large order, they just couldn't. So there was zero way for them to prepare for what was about to happen. I honestly thought, well, there's no way they'll strike at the liquor and cannabis because we're essential. Cannabis, I mean, people can argue on whether it's actually essential or not. I don't really care what other people's opinions are. If we want to look at alcohol, it is essential because, if someone has their blood level needs to have 4 liters of vodka per day to survive. Without that, they are going to go into withdrawal and it will be a problem. So just being linked to that, I was like, oh, there's no way that anything negative is going to happen to us. We'll be okay. We're essential. We've been deemed essential. Sure enough, the BCLDB was one of the main, I think the only actually picket line. There was 4 picket lines and they were all around liquor and cannabis distribution. Basically, the way the ordering model works in BC, you have to order every week. You can't really stock up because 100% of your inventory has to be stored on site. So your footprint is really determined how much cannabis you can hold at a store level, as well as just the culture of cannabis. The freshest weed is the best weed. So you want to be getting all of those brand new drops. So you're not going to stock up on 30 boxes of something that was, harvested in June when next week more stuff's going to come out that's fresher. So every store in BC was, even the big boys, like we're a small independent. We have 1 location. We're owned by 4 families. Or 3 families. Actually, we're really, really small. But even the big boys were in trouble. Like they needed to get their cannabis. So everything was closed down. So the website was closed down. The customer service was closed down. There was nobody telling us. Like, I think we went 2 weeks without any sort of communication from the government. Oh, no, sorry. They did tell us that if you made an order now, it would be packaged for when the strike ended. But but no warning. Like, actually, they sent it after it was closed. Like, I think we got an email at 4:12. Yeah, that's what happened. We got an email at like 4:12 that as of 4 p.m., any order made prior to 4 p.m. would be in queue. You know what I mean? Like,
That's some bureaucratic efficiency right there.
yeah, totally. So it was really wild. And it like where I'm reminded often in my journey of cannabis that I'm still an advocate. And I was like, oh shit, we're in trouble. Like, we have no weed. And again, this is coming from someone who in Legacy, the store that I worked for, was rated at about 4 p.m. 0 product left behind. And by 7 p.m., we were fully open and operational with more strains than we lost. So I just couldn't fathom, how the heck are we going to run out of weed? Like, never in a million years have we run out of weed. And then it also highlighted there's these BC cannabis stores that are owned by the government and actually are run on my shop's tax dollar. They get cheaper weed. They sell the weed cheaper than everybody. And I heard rumblings, but even before I heard rumblings, my gut said, there's no way that these BC cannabis stores didn't have some sort of heads up to, double, triple, quadruple their order in preparation for this. And if that's the case, what the hell? I think like a week and a half into the strike, I called the BC cannabis store in Victoria. And I was like, oh, how are you guys, doing? Like, what, are you out of anything? And the lady was like, are we out of anything?
Meanwhile, you've got mum and pop stores closed down, stores consolidating staff, laying people off in private businesses, and they're shocked that you'd even ask that question.
Yeah, they were so disconnected from the reality of the situation. And I got a lot of slack. Like, they were like, people were in my DMs being like, they're the same industry workers as you, and they're the same, they're part of this industry just like you. And I was like, they need to leave. If they have the passion for cannabis and they want to be in this industry forever, do not work there, or work there and apply to every other pot shop in your vicinity until you get a job at a local independently run retailer, because that is where the culture is.
The excessive taxation on the products is already one thing that, is a huge barrier for the consumer, for store owners and things like that. But it is such a unique situation in Canada. I noticed at first working in liquor and then cannabis, that you could have the government being a distributor, a wholesaler, and a retail store at the same time. That is a monopoly that in Western society should be unforgivable. It doesn't really seem to make a lot of sense that they get to hold that over everyone else, and you've got to go through them and pay kind of at multiple points for the privilege of the government offering that service. And if we circle back to before, whilst not doing a very kind of great job, not incredibly informed, not having kind of a long-term game plan, it's really frustrating to be at the whim. And for you guys to persevere through 4 years, 2 years of COVID, and just 2 years of an industry that drastically changed. And I saw that with customers that would come in. I'm an Australian, so for me, legalization in Canada was an incredible privilege. But for Canadians who had existed in this beautiful utopia of high quality buds from a dispensary experience, from people that knew about it, to now have to come to these stores, pay more, have these containers that don't make sense, that sometimes don't open, you can't see your buds, you can't smell it. The experience has drastically changed for Canadians. So I see Canada's model, with the exception of the excessive government overreach, working somewhere like Australia. I think we could have these generic kind of products because we don't have this existing culture. But there was an existing weed culture pretty much wiped out, replaced with this model. You've been so resilient. And then there was just a huge slap in the face with this strike for all the private businesses who have kept this difficult industry afloat for the last 4 years.
Yeah, I think I forget what dispensary it was, but they had to close, I think, for about 11 days, just waiting for stock. And they made a post saying this will be their 36th month in total over the last 4 years, paying for rent on their business when they couldn't have their doors open, because of the process that it took to get approved. You have to get approved on a municipal level, a provincial level, and then a federal level. And then you have to have all these things like an air filtration system that costs way too much money, that isn't needed because there's no open product.
Oh, the rules and regulations. Like it should make sense. Like, you wish your governments could go, oh, that doesn't make sense, we can fix that within the next 2 months. But instead it just sits there. You go, oh yeah, this is this dumb thing we have to do.
Yeah. Like for example, if you do, because now in Canada, we are allowed smell and touch jars. Any weed that you put in those jars must be destroyed with kitty litter and water. You have to stick it in a bucket and you have to put kitty litter in it and then put water in it. And your inspector looks for that when they come. And it's just like, why is that necessary? Like, why do you care what happens to that weed? Yeah, it's really hard to own any business and run it successfully, but it's just like constant roadblocks after roadblock after roadblock, and nothing is being reassessed, which is frustrating. And it's hard because there isn't a lot of actionable support. And that's where I was coming from with my boycott BC cannabis stores. Because to me, that's something that's actual support you can give the independents and say, look, I get it. You don't have any stock. You're struggling. You had to lay off your staff. Pineapple was lucky. We didn't have to close our doors. We were scheduled to close August 31st. And on August 30th, they said the strike is over. So we were able to stay open. But I think over 40% of retailers in BC closed their doors for a period of time. Many of those stores had to lay off 90% or more of their staff. And a lot of those stores were legacy shops that made it through because they're doing it right. They don't have an excess of crappy product.
They're not willing to give everyone that has varied taste just a TWD sativa pre-roll and just go, yeah, well, you've
Totally.
got some weed at the moment. It's like, well, no, we want to stand by the thing we're selling.
Yeah. And to be honest, those are probably, that specific product was probably one of the last things on the shelves for many
Yeah,
people.
yeah,
You know
definitely.
what I mean?
My fellow bud tenders and I often had kind of the joke pre-roll that we'd give to people that were difficult customers. Like, just
Yes.
you get those really rude and brash people, and it was either a Prohibition blend Trailblazer or the TWD sativa. It's like, yeah, this is our highest quality stuff, man. You're gonna love this.
I always joked, that's funny because I always joked that for some people, you just wish a sign would come down and their only option was weed. Like they don't deserve a menu. Like they just get the weed. So yeah, that I totally understand that. Like that's the weed that they get. They don't get a menu. They
Yeah,
get
yeah,
you get this weed or
yeah.
this weed. What do you want? And that's that.
And look, for a lot of customers, that actually makes a lot of sense. Like, it's just weed, man. Like, sometimes you do your spiel, you'd give them the options. What experience do you want? What are you looking for? What have you tried before? It's like, I just want some weed, man. You're like, all right, cool. I know what you need. And that in itself is a skill. And while we joke that kind of we were giving it to the difficult customers, it still was what they wanted after all.
Oh,
Just some weed,
totally.
man.
Just some weed. That's it. Right. So, yeah. And I guess that's why it shocks me too that we talk about brands. Like we have, I mean, this one hilarious customer that comes in all the time and he's clearly bought stock in Aurora or
And is he blaming you for their constant decline as well? Like,
like he's like, I gotta buy that Aurora weed because like I own stock. And like I remember one day I just said to him, I'm like, you know that like because I had had enough. Like you do reach your limits, but I was like, you know that no one in the cannabis industry owns any cannabis stocks, right? That should tell you something.
I had a guy complain to me that he'd lost $150,000 on stocks, that me on my $16.50 an hour was going to care that this guy had lost 150 grand. It's just like, dude, I don't have the potential of ever having $150,000 in my life. I'm not feeling sorry for you that you thought that the cannabis boom was going to, send you into a super yacht styled retirement. So yeah, not a lot of sympathy to give to those people. Hey,
So funny.
we've talked a lot about the challenges of the industry. You've painted such a great picture of before and after. In light of the challenges, in light of what a struggle it's been, you persevered through COVID. We don't need to linger on COVID because everyone's been through it. But you fought through a global pandemic, but then a local issue seemed to be a way bigger challenge than kind of COVID ended up being. Let's talk a little bit about what the positives of the industry are, because there's still a lot to be excited about. There's still a lot for the customers to enjoy. There's still a lot for the bud tenders to enjoy. Me working in it, I was blown away by the fact I could go to an infused dinner with a contestant from MasterChef, that there were things like the Lift & Co Expo where you can go and legitimately talk to people about cannabis. The conversations I got to have on a daily basis, I get to have once every 3 months in Australia because we don't have that kind of culture. So what is it that you do enjoy and appreciate about the industry itself?
I'm kind of a rose colored glasses girl. I'm very appreciative that I am no longer breaking the law. That's something that is like really, really vital to my existence. I'm a mother. I want to be a good example for my child. I also want him to know that he should fight for what he believes in. So but yeah, now that it's legal, when people ask me what I do, I tell them. I think it's part of my job to break the stigma. When people say, oh, it's almost wine o'clock somewhere, I always say weed o'clock. Like I always kind of put in my 2 cents. And I think those little things kind of help break down the stigma. So that's the main thing I'm the most grateful for, is being able to tell people what I do and not break the law. The other things I'm really excited about is research. Things don't have to be anecdotal anymore now that we are legal. We are starting to see conversations change. Like I always tell this story to kind of say how far I've come. Like I remember one time right early on in selling weed, somebody came in and asked for something fruity. They were like, oh, I want something fruity. And at that time, I thought this guy was bananas because weed is weed and it smells like skunk and it doesn't taste
Yeah.
fruity and it doesn't smell fruity. And, like what a turd, basically. Like, I was like, this guy knows nothing. So, I did my best and just gave him what I thought looked good. Cut to now, I can smell weed and tell you the top 3 terpenes, or you know what I mean? Like, so I've come quite a long way. And because my journey was so drastic from like really knowing nothing to I'm nowhere near knowing everything, but I'm working towards continuing to learn. That gets me really excited because there's all these new people who think that way, who think, weed is weed and it smells like skunk and, it makes you stoned or whatever. So that gets me really excited. And that's why I always say, even to this day, I'm a bud tender first. No matter how far I get into this industry, I believe and feel I'm a bud tender first. And so that gets me excited. People coming in that have never tried it, people that can't drink but desire some sort of vice to like let go at the end of the day, and being able to help and educate them with actual research, you know what I mean? Instead of just being like, because like no one ever really talked about like linalool or terpinolene or any of that in legacy. I really think the conversation around like terpenes came into legal weed.
And people can talk to what works for them and what doesn't. I know limonene is not for me.
Yeah. And isn't that so empowering? And that's like really, for me, I thought I couldn't smoke sativas. And I spent the first probably, I'm going to even say like 15 years of my cannabis journey completely avoiding all sativas, just never trying them. I tried it once. It was a horrible experience. I'm a very anxious person by nature, and it just sent me to a horrible place. And that experience helped me understand why some people don't touch weed. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like I was like, oh, I get it. Like this was horrible. I got a job working with a lot as a cannabis curator. And what they do is they send you 5 weeds in a bag. They don't tell you what it is, and you have to smoke them. And it gave me a lot of anxiety because I'm like, for sure, some of these are going to be sativa. Like there's just no way around it. I'm definitely going to smoke a sativa. I'm going to have a horrible time. And I'm going to have to talk about it with these people. I smoked all 5 strains and none of them gave me a negative experience. I had a really positive experience. And in fact, one of them I started painting with, and I was like, okay, this, I made my notes, whatever. And then at the end of the month, they tell you what the strains are. And the strain I smoked was Blue Dream by Simply Bare, which I'm sure you've tried.
Absolutely superb. Yeah.
It's so good, right? So in that moment, when I found out that I smoked a Blue Dream, like, are you, and I had a good time. So from that moment, I was like, okay, so it's not sativas. I can't just put it under the umbrella that all sativas are bad. They're not. There's something in it. So I'm going to say it probably took me, I think I've been probably a year and a half now. I know I can't smoke terpinolene. That's that gassy when, someone smells the weed and they're like, oh, that gas. I need that fire, that gas. I do not need the fire. I do not need the gas.
Yeah.
It is not for me. And I can successfully navigate a relationship with sativa cannabis narrow leaf, if we want to get like, some people are really fighting to eliminate indica sativa.
And there's a lot of merit to that. It's just that there isn't a reasonable replacement yet. Trichome Institute have theirs, CannaReps have theirs. Lots of great ideas, but I'm not ready to completely abandon indica sativa and hybrid until there's kind of an agreed replacement.
Agreed. That's how I feel. I think that you can still use those words. What's it called when like a word takes on new meaning? Like it had a meaning before and then it kind of evolves and has a new meaning.
Semantic change or shift.
That's kind of like how I look at indica and sativa, because they are descriptive in what the people want to feel when they smoke the weed, right? So I'm not ready to forego those terms either, but I'm ready to elaborate on them, which I think is key. So like when I have a conversation with someone coming in looking for cannabis, you're curating an experience. That's kind of like how I like to view it. So like you said, why are you smoking? What are you trying to achieve? Where will you be? What are your desired outcomes or effects? And sometimes the terpenes in a sativa are better at achieving that than the terpenes in an indica, but you can still get limonene in an indica, even though that's typically something you would find in a sativa. So with you saying you don't like limonene, in the olden days, you might be like, I can't smoke any sativas because all of the sativas are lemony and that's not what I like. But now we can be like, okay, well, actually, this indica is the first terpene on it is limonene. So you should stay away from that. Whereas before we'd be like, I don't know why that made you feel that way. It's an indica. You're supposed to feel down. And I get really, kind of nerdy about that. And I like to delve in. And there's nothing to me as a bud tender, nothing better than a challenging customer that you like have slowly been working on. And then, they're like, terpene, and then they're like, oh, actually, and then they're like, so what else do you know? And you finally kind of
Yes.
won them over.
Such a win.
Yeah, it's such a win. It feels so good. So that, and I think that again, like as a bartender, if we want to equate it back to cannabis, I just don't think they have those experiences. Cause like really, maybe the first couple drinks, you might notice the difference between tequila or beer or wine, but the end is always the same. If you drink too much, you get drunk, and then it doesn't really matter what you drink or how it makes you feel. It makes you feel like garbage. Whereas with cannabis, there's just so many variations, and it's, your biochemistry plays a role, your environment plays a role, your mood prior plays a role. Like, all these different things affect how cannabis uses you or uses you, how you use cannabis. But coming back to your question, like, what are the things you enjoy? I enjoy that about legalization, that these people, teachers, doctors, nurses, moms, they're coming in and they are, one, willing to try using cannabis, and two, they're ready to go on a journey and learn. And like, that's really exciting as a bud tender and as just someone in the industry, because the more people that dabble in cannabis, the better for all of us, because then it might not be for them, or they might only use it occasionally, but they'll have an understanding that you're not like some like zombie munchy monster who's like drooling with red eyes. And it's like, no, if I didn't tell people I smoked weed every day, I really don't think the majority of people in my life would know.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that is the thing. It's like the people that are representing us are probably the most blatant example of being stoners or lazy. That's who people can see or smell on the street or whatever it might be.
Totally.
The rest of us are getting on with it whilst happening to also consume cannabis. It enhances our lives. It makes things better. We still have to be aware that sometimes it makes things worse. Like there are times it's like, oh, yep, that one increased my anxiety. That one ruined my sleep or whatever. That's the nature of being a bud tender, is we explore these different things to help people find what works for them. But ultimately, we wouldn't be doing it so consistently if it didn't improve our lives. We're getting on with it. We're getting shit done.
And that's like the nature of any relationship. And that's why I kind of look at cannabis use. It is a relationship. Like some days are good and some days are bad. And like you can give up and decide not to use it anymore. But like you really do have to evaluate, am I having more good days than bad? Are there moments that I can point to recently where I consumed cannabis and had a really positive experience, and like how has it made me better? And I think the more you go down that journey, the more willing you are to forgive negative experiences, because that okay, maybe that was just the plan. And that comes down to education too, because like there's people who maybe tried it once and they went into a shop, and I mean, there's so many shops where you go into and you're like, oh, hey, I was just like, even me. I go into other people's shops because I like to see other people's experiences and, see what other bud tenders are doing out there. And I'll be like, oh, I'm looking for, a higher THC indica pre-roll. And they just like throw a menu at me. And I'm like, ugh, gross. Like, thanks for having so many options, but like, this isn't what it's about. Like, I want to chat with you. What have you smoked recently? What was good? Like, what did you hate? Why did you love it? Like, and I think a lot of people aren't getting that experience, which sucks, but then you just have to kind of guide them. And that's another reason why don't go to the basic cannabis stores. Don't go to the big box stores that you can look at their website and see. You can almost see what their goals are, where their passion lies. Like some people, their passion lies in making money, and like that's fine. There's room for everybody. I don't think anyone should be kicked out of the industry, but like really figure out who you are and who you want to support. Like it's so funny. I'm sure you noticed in Vancouver and Victoria, it's like shop local vibes, right? Like everyone's like, no big box stores, no Walmart. Like they really don't like that. But for some reason that hasn't like trickled down to the cannabis industry. Like they haven't figured out that we could be local too.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I really love that you said cannabis is a relationship and then extrapolated on it. It's not just a snappy phrase. You explained that really well. That relationship with your bud tender is important too. They are such a gateway to intense knowledge, or they should be. Their experience with the products, just even discussion with their colleagues. Like I worked with a couple of people whose entire cannabis relationship was with CBD products. So they very rarely use THC, perhaps maybe to try something every couple of weeks or something like that. But ultimately, vaping flower in the morning, oils, capsules, creams, things like that, it's a completely different experience. And as someone who loves, a higher THC indica, no matter what the time of day, it's great to have those friends. It's great to have people that that I think you and I have kindred spirits in so many ways, but particularly that sativa thing you said. I always thought that I couldn't do sativas, and I found a couple that do work really well for me. But then I've got colleagues who are the inverse of me, can't handle indica, get in their own head, get paranoid, get sedated. That's not for them. So it's great to have all those perspectives come together and guide someone's experience. Your bud tender has colleague experience, has research experience, personal experience. They're such an important person to have a relationship with.
Oh, totally. And nothing better than finding a bud tender who has a similar cannabis palate to you. That's the best. Like when it takes a while to figure that out. It takes a couple of visits. Like one of our employees at Pineapple, him and we have the exact same, like, I don't know if our biochemistry or our, mental illnesses all line up to this like perfect place where if he recommends something, I know I'm going to feel the exact same way about it. And I know that I have people who come to me and it's the same. It took him a while. Oh, what you recommended to me last time really sucked. Like, I really didn't like that. Okay. That tells me you and I are different. Now, I know my buddy Kevin and I are totally different. What he loves to smoke, and then, recommend on something else. And then it grows. I always talk about cannabis, especially on a medical level, but it really applies to any level of cannabis use, that sometimes we're not trying to get high, we're trying to get even. And so we're trying to maintain this like homeostasis of where like the good times roll, and that doesn't mean where we're high, but like where, your kid can spill a glass of milk on the counter and it's no big deal. Your plans can be canceled and it's okay, things like that. So for some people, if they live in depression, they're kind of living below that line of homeostasis. So something stimulating brings them up to even instead of making them high. Or someone who lives really anxiously, if they smoked a sativa, they're way above the line. But if they smoke an indica, they're down to that homeostasis line. And that's also, I kind of like, as a mom who consumes cannabis, I don't really like the comparison to alcohol, because I just don't think people who use alcohol, if people used alcohol the same way they used cannabis, I don't think we'd be as forgiving. You know what I mean? Like it just wouldn't make so much sense. So like if I wake up at 6:30 in the morning and I have a joint, which happens often with my coffee, like I'm not getting high first thing in the morning. Even though to the outsider who doesn't use cannabis would be like, oh my God, you're getting high. Or like I have a friend who doesn't use cannabis at all. I joke that when she turns 50, I'm going to make her smoke a joint. She's like 42 and she's already freaked out about it. Like she's like... she won't do it. I know that by the time 50 rolls around, she won't do it. But I remember I was at her house. She's got 2 kids. I've got 1 kid. There were some other kids there and everyone was drinking. And I just said, I'm just going to duck around the back. And I usually bring a vape for, times like that, so that I'm not offending anybody with my skunkiness. I'm like, I'm just going to, duck around the corner, which already sucks. Everyone else is drinking out here, but I'm going to duck around the corner and have a little hoot. she didn't say much. I went and did my thing and then came back and she goes, so you get high when you're around your son? And I was like, dude, you're 3/4 of a bottle of wine in. And just the look on her face, she had never even thought about
That comparison has not been made. I can barely drink 3 alcoholic beverages these days. I did that last night at a wedding and I'm
yeah.
feeling it today. So it's very, very different, and our levels of function are grossly underestimated.
Oh, totally. And I think that too just comes like, bringing it back to the more people that try and understand, and the more people, like, it sounds silly to say, it's my job to educate people when I'm outside of the shop, like it's my job when I'm getting paid when I'm in Pineapple to talk about weed. Outside in the real world, I talk about weed just about as much as I do inside because I really feel like there's more of us out there that don't talk about it and feel like they need to hide it. And like, I mean, hopefully no one from my son's school hears this, only the people who work there, but like there are moms that come and meet me in the parking lot and they're like, is there any way you could grab me,
Wow. It's legal
XYZ?
and they still want the kind of under the table,
Yeah. And it's
don't
like,
want anyone to know
and
about this.
sometimes I'll be like, why don't you come to the shop with me? Like, pick me up, let's go to the shop. But some people don't, they just, is there any way that you could grab me? And even like CBD gummies or like, things like that. And I just say, yeah, like I'll do that. Cause like I want you to get to a spot where you see it's no big deal. It's no big deal to me. And I know I am privileged of being in the industry for a decade and like, I'm working in different facets of the industry and, it is everyday life to me. But I want the people who use on Saturday night to feel like they can walk into a weed shop and grab what they want or need, or, you know what I mean? And like, we will get there, but everything is still, and I can't imagine being in Australia, especially after you've had the experience in Canada. Like I can imagine that being so challenging. But like I guess I'll say to you, like you're coming. You know what I mean? You'll be
Yes.
here soon.
Yeah. And on that note, I do think those of us that, I have a very privileged position where coming back from Canada, when people asked me what I did in Canada, I told them. And you'd see people get uncomfortable, but I had gone to somewhere where it was legal, where it was allowed, and they had to immediately get over that stigma just from the fact that, because I wasn't saying, oh, I smoke weed and I love it. It was, I worked in the cannabis industry, and immediately that was an issue for them, but they had to work their way through that. And I do think those of us that have the privilege of working in the industry, or in my case, used to work in the industry, we do have a bit of an obligation to evangelize this, not to indoctrinate anyone, not to convince them to do it, because it isn't for everyone,
Mhm.
but just to understand that there is a level of functional legitimacy that breaks down barriers, breaks down taboos, breaks down stigmas. The Vancouver Police Department are allowed to smoke weed. That's a huge, huge deal. The RCMP, the Royal Canadian Police, are not allowed. So there's still huge barriers and taboos to work their way. But those of us that are allowed to talk about it, that are allowed to do it, I do think have a bit of an obligation to share the good word. I'm getting a little religious here.
No, but that's how I feel too. And I think that it's good to remind yourself that people like, and I say this too, like I was part of the reason that weed was legalized in Canada. I worked on the front lines before it was legal, and it's only because I believed in it. And when legalization first happened, I wasn't putting my legacy work on my resume. I wasn't telling people that and then someone said to me, girl, you got 10 years experience in an industry that's, 3 years old. And I was like, oh, wait, that's pretty amazing, actually. And like, that's the same to you, right? Like, you had this privilege of coming to Canada and working in the industry when it was brand new, but that gives you this ultimate deeper understanding of where things are going. You know what I mean? Whereas other people in Australia might not have that view, or they might, they might feel like they have to hide it, or, because I mean, I don't know how harsh the laws are. Like if you were caught with
Honestly, I think the social stigma is a greater barrier than the law. Ultimately, I reflect back on all my times of living, knowing people that smoke weed. No one's ever really gotten in any serious trouble for it from the law. It's your mum, it's your
Right.
neighbor, it's your boss, it's all these people who have made a decision about what it does based on, reefer madness or their own one experience when they were 17 and they didn't like it. And then that feeds it. And that's probably the bigger challenge. And that's why I feel privileged to have worked in it, because I'm not that scared of the cops. And now that I'm a medical patient, I'm completely above board. But I am certainly scared of my friends' wives, or my mate's mate who saw me smoking a joint at the party and now think that I'm a complete idiot or whatever it might be. That's a way bigger challenge, and I think that speaks to Australia culturally. We're more scared of each other than we are of the authorities.
Right. Yeah. From being so cheeky. That's why you guys,
That's us.
it's expected to be. Yeah, that's interesting because it is the same here too. And even post legalization, like I say, I'm kind of out there crusading every day. And like I've had someone ask me, like at my son's schools, oh, what do you do? And then I say I work in the cannabis industry. And one lady just literally did a 180 and just faced her back to me. And I was like, oh,
Wow.
that's neat. Like I've never
Yeah.
had a human being do that to me before.
And like, if you work in the gambling industry or the cigarette industry, that might make sense. But the false equivalence of the damage you're doing to society, like to turn her back on you. But that's what people do.
Yeah, they do. They just, and I think that again, like I'm a firm believer, most of it is lack of understanding. So if they'll lend an ear for just a few seconds, and I tell, new bud tenders at Pineapple too, I'm like, you don't have to teach them everything the first time they're here. You just have to get the wheels turning so that the next time they come, they might ask you for a little bit more. And then the next time they come, they might ask you just for a little bit more. So what were you saying about terpenes? I know like 3 times ago, I rolled my eyes at you and just,
Yeah.
but this time, I'm starting to wonder, because last time you said this might make me feel relaxed because of the linalool. And actually, so you just got to kind of like pick away at people. And I think that the people who are best at that are the people who aren't going to go anywhere because they have all the time in the world, right? Like I can spend unlimited hours. You come see me once a week for infinity. And by the end of this, I bet we'll think the same on a few things. So, but it's a lot of work and not everyone is cut out for it. Like a lot of people look at bud tending as like a sales job, which is wild to me because I'm like, it's not like and even when you work for like, talk to people in corporate cannabis, they talk about like basket fillers and and it's like,
Oh yeah, love a basket count.
yeah, like I get it, but like in the same sense, cannabis is kind of an emotional purchase. Like it's different. And like, you can add a beverage to everybody's cart if that's what you want me to do. But at the end of the day, you're not really enriching them and you're not really enriching the company either, because if a beverage isn't what they wanted or what they needed, they're not going to buy it again. And that's really what you want, is people coming back for more. So yeah, it's interesting. It's definitely been a journey. There are a lot of similarities. There are obviously a lot of differences. But I do think in the long run, we're better off to be legal, and we're better off to kind of go through these hoops and kind of remember, like, what I said before, it's you're going to have some good stories to tell at the end of all of this, because it can't stay like this forever. It will eventually change. Like edible minimums will go up. You'll be able to have more than 30 grams, I believe, more than 30 grams on your person. You're going to be able to buy out of a jar again. We just have to be patient. My mom always said, you don't stop halfway through a mud puddle, right? Like you keep going.
I think it's Winston Churchill. It's like, if you're going through hell, keep going. And that's, the industry has been hell at times. But I would always say to the difficult customers, like the first cell phone, I think, was demonstrated in 1973. The first consumer one was out in the 80s. The iPhone came out in 2008. Like, think about what that went through to get from the conception point to design to actually being functional, then to the first iPhone, to the iPhones we have now, to the quality of cameras. Like, we need to be patient, but it's almost like an active patience. It's like,
Right.
I'm going to be in this, I'm going to agitate for change, I'm going to talk about the things that aren't working, but at the same time, I'm going to embrace the fact that this industry exists. I love that you said it's better to have it than to not. And that's how I feel as well. It is a flawed system. It is an imperfect system. It is a horrendously run system at times, but I'd
Yeah.
rather have that than nothing.
Yeah, me too. And I would rather it be legal. And like even with the whole strike and how we couldn't get product for a while, and like honestly it's not over. Like they stood down in good faith and they don't like the deal that was brought to them. Like apparently it wasn't a good deal. They haven't had a vote on it, but if you can trust the Reddit gods, they're probably gonna vote no. And then we'll have to figure out what that means. Are they going to restrike cannabis and liquor? They don't have to vote for a strike because they didn't end it. They just stood down. So if they decide they can strike again with no notice, there's been rumblings that they'll wait until it's closer to Christmas to have a larger impact. So that's all, now, every cannabis business owner is going to try and have, a little bit extra stock just in case the worst thing happens. And then BC has also allowed direct sales, which coincidentally came into effect the day of the strike, but no one was prepared for
Of
it.
course.
And even with the direct delivery, they take 15%.
God damn
So
it.
I know they're not storing the product, they're not delivering the product, and they're still taking the same cut from these direct deliveries.
They've reduced the kind of accountability on their end. That
Their
not having to store
workload,
it.
their
Yeah,
accountability is
and they're still taking
reduced.
the same amount of money.
Yeah, and those independent, like those LPs, licensed producers, they have to tell the government what they plan to sell their product for, and they must sell it for that price. So at first I was like, oh, that leaves, we could negotiate with people. We'll take X amount of your product if you
Build
reduce the cost.
relationships and
Yeah, but no, the government wants to know exactly what you're selling for exactly how much. There's no wiggle room, and you will still pay them 15% of your profits. For what?
yeah. What have you guys done to earn that?
Yeah.
And then the customer is then being taxed at the other end as well. The exorbitant licensing fees. No wonder the government is making a lot of money off cannabis right now.
Yeah, and that's something else that the strike brought up. A large amount of money has been made in tax, and it's not gone. Where did it go? Because these people are striking for living wage and they're your employees. How come the tax money that we've generated hasn't gone back into the communities where we live? I don't understand.
The mind boggles. I think Canada is so lucky to have someone like you asking these questions, advocating, because that's what really inspired this conversation. Seeing that strike and seeing you let people know where they can shop, what their other options are, to support local businesses, to support real families that run stores, rather than this government who have been integral to the rollout, who have been important to the legalization, but seem to continue to just get their fingers all over everything and not for the benefit of the people that are trying to make a living and trying to make a go out of this industry. So I'm really, really grateful for your time today and your passion and your knowledge. There's so much we can talk about. And I think down the track, we get together and we talk about this stuff again. But as we approach the end, I have a little segment that I stole from Jim Jeffries' podcast, I Don't Know About That. And it is a dinner party fact. And for the sake of this conversation, I'm going to call it Poles of Wisdom. That's what this segment is called. So basically, the aim of this is kind of like just a quick, short, snappy fact that, if you were at a dinner party or you were needing to change someone's mind kind of on a dime, what's a bit of knowledge you'd drop to them about cannabis to kind of maybe just plant a seed or to change their mind about something?
Oh God, I'm not short-winded, so quick, let's see. I think honestly, like I will touch back on something like your relationship with cannabis is a journey. So like any relationship we have with any people, you could have a negative first time or a negative first reaction. You could decide to just call it quits then, or maybe you could explore that a little bit and further the relationship, further the journey. So I always say to anybody who is not tried cannabis before, because I'm jealous that I never did this when I had never tried cannabis before. but to start a journal and to really, like, if you're interested in cannabis in the slightest, give it a chance. Like, don't just go off of one moment or one experience, and really kind of like take the time to build a really great relationship with the plant, because it's pretty amazing. And if you give it that opportunity and chance to see what role it plays in your life, which is going to be different than everybody else, you could really use it as a tool, like whether that's for parenting or studying or just functioning better on a daily basis at home or in your own head. So yeah, that's what I think it would be, is if you're interested in cannabis, it doesn't have to be anything fancy, like just whip out like a blank notebook or a piece of paper, and every time you try, just try to like record a little bit and figure out, is it the limonene, is it the terpinolene, do you hate linalool, like, and how did you feel, better or worse? And like, are you willing to go on a journey and kind of find where it would fit with you? I think that would be my one tidbit, maybe.
That's fantastic. Start a journal. I mean, that's good advice for life anyway,
Totally.
gratitude journals and taking a moment to kind of reflect. But that's outstanding advice. What was the effect? What had you done that day? I think it's great to kind of keep a track on that and not just write cannabis off with one negative experience or even two or three. If you truly do want to have a relationship with it, it will take some time. I think about when I was a teenager and all the negative experiences I had with drinking and how long I continued to drink despite those negative experiences. So I think cannabis has so much more potential than booze, yet people aren't as willing to kind of cut it the slack that they do for alcohol.
Yeah. And I think that because there's such a loudness to what the negatives of weed are. And I think that comes. So if you experience any of those things that you've loudly heard about how horrible it is on your first go, it's really easy to chalk it up that all weed
this is that sleepiness that I was told about. This is that paranoia I've heard all about.
Oh yeah, the
God, I'm dying.
munchies, or you know what I mean? Like, I always laugh so hard. Like, one of the moms that I know from school, I gave her something, and it was a sativa leaning, lemonine heavy vape. And she was like, "Oh God, I ate so much." And I was just like, okay, like that. I mean, maybe, but like, I'm a firm believer that, the munchies maybe aren't. I mean, they're real if you want them to be real, but like, you could also like not eat the food. I don't know. I think it's definitely one of the relationships in my life that have helped me grow the most. Like, it helps me get a deep breath when I can't catch a deep breath. You can work a lot of like meditation into cannabis. Like, I have a hard time like letting things go. And I also have a hard time visualizing. Like, I just am not I can't visualize things, but when I'm smoking weed, if I need to let things go, like the physical blowing out of the smoke, like I can take a deep breath and let things go and finish a full thought. And like, there's lots of ways to get there, but cannabis, I think, is like the most fun way to get there. And then it's also all natural. There's no other side effects other than, maybe the munchies or whatever. But yeah, it's a pretty cool tool, I think.
Well, Amanda, your knowledge, passion, and expertise has been so valuable today. There's so many ideas that have come up that make so much sense, but there's also so many ideas that I know for our listeners will start to create questions. And that's what this podcast is all about. Learn something, question something. So thank you so much for your time, your energy, and your passion today. Canada is so lucky to have you, and we were so lucky to have you with us today.
Oh, that's so sweet. I really loved being here. And yeah, like, if you ever want to chat again, let me know. Let's do it weekly,
I'd love that. And of course, for our listeners that are in Canada, make sure you check out Pineapple Express in Victoria. It's a great store. I visited myself. I've had the experience. It's a beautiful place. And where can our listeners find you on the internet?
Right now, you can find me on Instagram, mostly at Tacky Gems 3.0, because I've been deleted a few times.
Classic.
Yeah, so classic. It's a badge of honor. And then I'm also I'll have a webpage soon, tackygems.com. And yeah, that's the best place to find me. And I'd love to chat. Any questions, hit up my DMs. I'm there.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I hope you have a great day.
You too. Bye, Paul.
Give and Toke Cannabis Conversations is written and produced by me, Paul. Music is written, produced, and performed by Big Mike. Follow us on Instagram at giveandtoke or get in touch by emailing giveandtoke@gmail.com. All opinions expressed by program guests are solely their current opinions and do not necessarily reflect the position of Give and Toke. Content discussed in this show does not constitute medical advice. Cannabis is not legal everywhere, so please respect local laws.